It's really an honor to be invited to speak at Berkeley, and I want to thank the Tang Center for Silk Road Studies and everyone else who made my visit here possible. Today it's really a great time and place to talk about how the Amazons of Greek myth were influenced by real women warriors of the steppes. And we really do seem to be living in a kind of Amazon moment right now. There are warrior women everywhere in popular culture, TV, politics, and in movies, like Wonder Woman and Black Panther. And there's a new Central Asian movie coming out based on the Amazon warrior queen Tomyris, who fought Cyrus the Great. And there was this Smithsonian Channel series, I think it's a trilogy, but now they have made yet a fourth one on epic warrior women. And of course, the World Nomad Games are now gaining global attention, and a lot of women participate in that too. And in fact, girls and women are taking up archery and shooting bows on horseback in unprecedented numbers around the world. And these are some modern, real-life modern archers. And by the way, you could actually learn to do this yourself. I know several women who actually take students in mounted archery. And if you join our Facebook group, I know Facebook is old-fashioned, but we have almost 6,000 members, and many of them actually participate in this ancient practice. So we're surrounded by stories and images of heroic warrior women. And some 2,500 years ago, the ancient Greeks also surrounded themselves with images and stories of bold and brave Amazons. The Greeks described these women as the equals of men. They were expert fighters with bows and arrows and spears. They loved their freedom, and they were as strong and courageous in battle as any man. And Amazons were wildly popular in vase paintings. And these are a few examples of Amazons in ancient vase paintings. We have more than 1,000 surviving images of Amazons on vase paintings, and keep in mind that's just a tiny fraction of what once existed. In Greek mythology, the Amazons were warlike women of eastern lands, east of the Mediterranean. Their traditional strongholds were around the Black Sea, but they were said to roam over a vast territory that the Greeks called Scythia, indicating the steppes around the Black Sea and beyond, all the way to Central Asia. And in Greek mythology, the Amazons played a major role in the legendary Trojan War, and the city of Athens was very proud to claim that the first Athenians had fought off a powerful Amazon army that had invaded Greece in the remote past. In Greek mythology, as you probably know, every great male champion, Heracles, Theseus, Achilles, each wanted to prove his courage by defeating a formidable warrior queen, and we have their names, Hippolyta, Antiope, and Penthesilea. And here we see a vase painting of Achilles killing Penthesilea and Heracles fighting Hippolyta. Those glorious struggles against female man-killers were first written down in epic poems like Homer's Iliad. Every Greek boy and girl, man and woman, they knew these tales by heart, and there were many versions of each tale. We know that because of vase paintings and texts. And the images of Amazons were everywhere they looked, on privately owned pottery and on public walls and monuments. Amazons were immensely popular in ancient Greek art. There were thousands of vase paintings, as I mentioned, sculptures, mosaics, little figures, and other objects depicting exciting Amazons in battle. And here we have Heracles fighting Amazons, led by Queen Hippolyta. Now, most Amazons were defeated and killed by these Greek heroes, but we do have some examples of ancient artists who illustrated scenes in which Amazons were actually killing Greek warriors, getting the best of Greek warriors. Here we have an example of that. Even though modern scholars have thought that Amazons were pure fiction, just fantasy, Greek and Roman historians and other writers never doubted that Amazons had really existed, at least in the remote past. Many ancient writers also reported that women living the lives of mythic Amazons still dwelled in lands around the Black Sea and beyond. So long before modern archaeologists began excavating the graves of real warrior women, those ancient writers did seem to understand that among the nomadic horse-riding peoples of the steppes of Western Asia, there were women living that same sort of rugged outdoor life as men. And one Greek historian wrote, "These warlike tribes have no cities, no fixed abodes. They live free and unconquered, and they are so savage that even the women take part in war," he wrote. Amazons, remarked the other writers, were as brave and ferocious in battle as the Scythian men. And here we see some modern descendants of ancient steppe nomads. From very early times then, ancient Greeks began to realize that the Amazons of their myths were somehow related to the living women of the land they called Scythia, that vast territory stretching from the Black Sea to China. The real nomad women were first described in detail in about 470, 450 BC by the historian Herodotus, and after him many ancient geographers, historians, and ethnographers identified Amazons with the women of Scythian lands. Herodotus described the Scythian lifestyle, and he wrote about their burials in kurgans or mounds on the steppes, and now archaeologists are able to confirm the surprising accuracy of many of his minutely detailed descriptions 2,500 years ago. And here I do want to note that the ancient Greeks were not the only culture of antiquity to tell tales about warrior women of the steppes. There are stories from ancient Egypt, Persia, Central Asia, India, and even China. But today, I thought we would focus on how archaeology is revealing just how much the ancient Greeks knew and what they got right about Scythians and the women that they called Amazons. Thanks to spectacular recent archaeological discoveries like this one, we now have some overwhelming confirmation that girls and women fitting the descriptions of Amazons in Greek literature and art really did exist in antiquity. These women were members of horse peoples who ranged over the lands north and east of the Mediterranean. Among these nomad tribes, the girls did grow up riding horses, and they were trained to use bows and spears like the boys. The women knew how to defend themselves. They could hunt game. They could go on raids for plunder, and they rode to battle along with the men. The lives of these tough nomadic women were very different from the lives of proper Greek women in antiquity, who were usually confined indoors to weave and mind children. They didn't live a rugged outdoor life, and that difference made a deep impression on the Greeks. The Greeks first began to encounter these nomadic peoples in the 7th century BC, when many Greek city-states started to establish trade colonies around the Black Sea. They met and traded with diverse but culturally related steppe tribes. Now, of course, each of these groups had their own names, their own dialects, their own histories, but they were all culturally related because their lives centered on horses and archery. And they became known to the Greeks as the Scythians. And I'm going to be using that collective term just for convenience in this talk. But keep in mind that they were diverse cultures, but related through horses and archery. Well, rumors and descriptions of these horse-riding nomads, much feared for their deadly arrows and expanding conquests, began to filter back to Greece. And it's easy to understand, we can imagine, how genuine knowledge mixed with hearsay, garbled details, travelers' reports, curiosity and imagination, and a lot of speculation to fill in the gaps, how all that fired up the Greek imagination and led to an outpouring of exciting stories and vivid pictures of Amazons. Now, the Scythians, those peoples themselves, they left no writings, so we have to depend on the writings of their neighbors. We have to depend on comparative ethnography and archaeology. And so much of what we know about these peoples comes from archaeological excavations of more than 1,000 ancient Scythian graves stretching from Ukraine, southern Russia, the Caucasus, to Central Asia. And here we have some female skeletons buried with weapons in that territory. Before the advent of bioarchaeology and DNA testing, it used to be taken for granted among archaeologists that all skeletons buried with weapons must have belonged to men. That was an assumption. But scientific testing is calling those assumptions into question. I just have a few examples. About 50 years ago, archaeologists in ancient Thrace, that's now Bulgaria, discovered 2 grave mounds from the 4th century BC. They're filled with magnificent treasures and some skeletons. Each mound held a wealth of weapons, armor, gold and silver artifacts, and richly equipped horses. And inside each of those grave mounds, the archaeologists found a pair of skeletons in each mound. They announced that the remains must have belonged to 2 powerful warrior chieftains buried with their wives. Now, that was 50 years ago. In 2010, DNA tests were finally carried out, and the results revealed that all 4 of the skeletons belonged to women. Another example happened in Italy, ancient Etruscan tomb, excavated in 2013. The chamber contained 2 skeletons. One was holding a spear, a very large spear. The other one had some pigments and needles. The discovery was hailed as the grave of a powerful warrior chieftain and his wife. DNA testing was done quickly, and it revealed that the skeleton holding the large spear was female and the other one was male, and the archaeologists had to scramble to reword their report. And there are new discoveries of armed women's burials being reported in Ukraine and in Central Asia. These discoveries just keep coming to light now that archaeology seems to be catching up with the reality of warrior women. Some of you may be familiar with the stunning discovery of a warrior woman reported a few years ago in Greece. New scientific tests revealed a surprising fact about the mysterious female remains in one of those 2 golden caskets in the magnificent Royal Macedonian tomb excavated back in the 70s at Virghina. And some believe that the male tomb or casket belongs to Alexander the Great's father, Philip II. That's still disputed. No one knows for sure. But what's interesting is that the other golden casket held female remains. And that tomb held a pair of gold and bronze greaves, the leg armor that you see there, and a fabulous golden quiver full of arrows and part of a bow. Those weapons are not Macedonian and they're not Greek. Those are Scythian weapons. And the archaeologists were also mystified because the greaves are not the same size, as you could see there. Now it turns out that the Scythian weapons and the mismatched greaves belong to the woman. She was about 32 years old when she died. Her bones showed constant horseback riding, and one of her legs had been broken and healed crookedly. So it was shorter than the other leg and smaller. The mismatched greaves apparently were custom made to fit her legs, and those were her weapons. So who was this real life Amazon in the Royal Macedonian tomb? Theories about her identity are being debated as we speak. I think a new book is coming out by David Grant about those theories about who she might be. Bioarchaeological studies and DNA testing of adult skeletons can reveal the sex, the health, the age at death, and other details with about 90% accuracy. The DNA studies tell us that a substantial number, the figure usually given is 25% to 37%, 1/4 to more than a third, of the burials with weapons in Scythia belong to women warriors. And here's a map of where most of those happen. These studies are calling into question the old assumptions, as I mentioned, that the presence of tools or weapons must indicate a male warrior. Archaeologists are now actually re-examining remains that have been misidentified as male warriors just because of their supposedly masculine grave goods. Many of the women buried with quivers, arrows, spears, daggers, battle axes, and war weapons like the men's. Many of them have war injuries, just like the male warriors exhibit. Archaeology shows that the Scythian women were laid to rest with the same honors as the men, with evidence of large funeral feasts and sacrificed horses, little kits for burning hemp, food for the afterlife, which was usually a cup of fermented mare's milk and a chunk of horse meat impaled on a wooden platter. And it's astonishing to realize just how many female warrior graves from antiquity have been found so far. I think more than 300 women warriors' burials have been identified thus far. The biggest concentration are north and east of Greece, in Bulgaria, Romania, Ukraine, South Russia, the Caucasus, and Kazakhstan. Those are the very places, the very areas that were identified as prime Amazon territory by the ancient Greeks and Romans. The typical grave goods of the women warriors in the heart of these Amazon lands include iron spears, massive iron fighting belts, armored belts, leather and gold quivers filled with bronze and wooden arrows, swords, battle axes, shields, necklaces, animal claws, golden earrings, and sometimes even clothing made of wool, leather, and hemp. The women's skeletons show evidence of a lifetime of hard riding and battle injuries. Most of the warrior women are believed to be between the ages of 16 and 45. The youngest girl warrior ever found was about 12 or 13. When she died, she was buried in iron armor with 2 spearheads, and that's evidence that youths were trained for battle among these people. Another nearby grave held the remains of 3 young girls about the age of 15. Their arsenal included heavy cavalry items, scaled armor, helmets, spears, shields, quivers full of arrows, along with gold necklaces. 3 of the most ancient warrior women's graves were found in the southern Caucasus region, in what is now the Republic of Georgia, a land strongly associated with Amazons in antiquity. And these women's skeletons were buried by their companions about 3,000 years ago, about 900 BC. This is the archaeological report in a Georgian journal. One of the women was about 30 years old. She was wearing a necklace of agate beads. She was placed in a sitting position, with her bronze sword across her lap, and a dagger and spear at her feet, and the jawbone of her horse and shield were nearby. The left side of her skull has a wound from a battle axe, and that wound had actually begun to heal before she died. The second woman had an arrowhead embedded in her skull, and next to the hand of a third warrior woman were several lion claws, perhaps hunting trophies. Some typical combat injuries of women with pointed battle axes. Of combat injuries of skeletons are yielding some striking details. Some women's legs were bowed from a lifetime on horseback. Many suffered arthritis from constant riding. Some women's hand bones actually reveal repeated heavy use of a bow. Typical battle wounds with weapons include ribs slashed by swords, arrowheads embedded in bones, and skulls punctured by pointed battle axes. Pointed battle axes are typical Amazon weapons in Greek vase paintings, and they are actually found in Scythian kurgans. Remarkably, by careful analysis of the bones, bioarchaeologists can often determine the direction of the opponent's attack. They can tell whether the blows occurred while someone was fighting face to face, on equal footing on the ground, or on horseback, whether someone was in motion when the blow was delivered, and whether or not they tried to deflect the blow. I think all this archaeological evidence points to a level of equality unheard of among the ancient Greeks. So it's really no wonder they were both fascinated and horrified by the barbarians of the steppes. I think it's little wonder that they spun such exciting what-if stories, pitting the strong, capable women against their own greatest heroes. Unlike the restricted lives of Greek girls, being an Amazon was an option for women on the steppes because they had been raised from childhood to ride horses and shoot arrows like their brothers. And this egalitarian lifestyle made perfect sense in that nomadic culture. In a small group on the harsh steppes, you're always on the move, you're facing constant threat from enemies. Everyone, male and female, young and old, is a stakeholder, and everyone was expected to take part in defense and raids. So it was natural, it was necessary to teach girls and boys the same horse riding skills, how to hunt, and how to use weapons. Everyone dressed alike in practical tunics and trousers, necessary for riding horses, and every member of the tribe could shoot a bow. The ancestors of these steppe peoples were the first people to domesticate horses, and they also perfected the small but powerful recurve bow, often called the Scythian bow. It's shaped like a Cupid's bow. These two inventions, the horse, riding horses, and the bow, those were the great equalizers in Scythian societies. The combination of horseback riding with archery, that means that a woman could be just as fast and deadly as a man on a horse with a bow. And the ancient Greeks, such as Herodotus and Plato, reported, and archaeology now confirms, that girls and young women did serve as active duty fighters, while older women with children could choose to continue that martial lifestyle if they wished. And in emergencies, of course, everyone was capable of riding out to meet the enemy. So whether by choice or compelled by circumstances, ordinary women of the steppes could be hunters and they could be warriors. In other words, these women were free to behave just like Greek men, glorying in their physical strength and liberty, roaming at will, chasing game, and killing enemies if they liked. And this lifestyle astounded the Greeks. It evoked awe and respect, but it also evoked some anxiety and fear. And I think that mixed reaction, combined with the storytelling imagination, that's what generated countless mythic tales about Greek heroes encountering Amazon queens from exotic eastern lands. And these popular stories were illustrated in thousands of artworks in Greece. And I was struck by another indicator of popularity of Amazons. If you go to the Louvre in Paris, you can see a collection of Amazon dolls recovered from the graves of young girls. And these dolls, some of them had movable arms and legs. They're almost like Barbie dolls. They wore helmets. They carried metal weapons that are missing in these pictures, but you can see how they would have held them. They could be dressed in different costumes. I think these dolls raise some interesting questions about the meaning of Amazons for the Greeks and the Romans. So archaeology is shedding new light on the ancient Greek narratives and the art about Amazons. It shows how some details in ancient literature and art that was once dismissed as fantasy or overlooked, they now turned out to be accurate representations of steppe nomads, the historical counterparts of mythic Amazons. And archaeology is revealing how much the Greeks actually knew about real warrior women and their Scythian lifestyle. For example, as the Greeks learned more and more about Scythians, they revised their portrayals of Amazons. They added realistic details in written accounts and art. In the 5th century BC, Herodotus reported that Scythian men and women enjoyed the intoxicating smoke from burning hemp. And archaeologists have found that Scythian men and women were buried with, as I mentioned, personal hemp-smoking kits in their graves, consisting often of little pots with burnt hemp residue and seeds inside. And in Greek art, the depictions of Amazons' clothing and weapons are striking changes for accuracy. The first, earliest images of Amazons appeared on vase paintings about 2,500 years ago, and those earliest scenes showed Amazons dressed like Greek warriors, with Greek-style helmets, Greek-style armor, and round shields, fighting on foot with swords, just like Greek hoplites. But Greek artists soon began showing Amazons on horseback, and we can even see two types of horses in the vase paintings. Some Amazons are on small, sturdy steppe ponies, while others are riding tall, lean horses bred for speed and endurance in more desert-like regions. And both types of horses are found in Scythian burials, both types. Other vases and sculptures depict Amazons riding barefooted with heel and ankle guards to guard against chafing while they're riding. And here is a vase painting showing an Amazon tying on ankle guards before she rides her horse. Her shield and quiver are hanging beside her. Scythian riders guided their horses with thighs, knees, and feet. So you can see that the artist is actually showing some of that equipment. Greek artists also started to depict Amazons with Scythian-style weapons, like those found in the burials. Instead of female warriors with Greek armor and weapons, the Amazons are now shown as archers. They're outfitted with distinctive recurved bows and decorated quivers with flaps worn on belts at their waist, like the grave goods show. Another very interesting and telling cultural detail is that vase painters began to show Amazon archers using the special nomad-style thumb draw instead of the Mediterranean draw used by Greek archers. Here you can see an example of that. And here's the nomad thumb draw that some artists show. The Greek artists also illustrated Amazon riders twisting around on their horses to shoot arrows backwards in the notorious and deadly Parthian shot. And as I mentioned, the recurve bow used by Scythian archers was an equalizer for the women. Unlike Greek bows, there was a trick to stringing the recurve bow. A very special technique was required. It's a technique rather than simple brute strength. To attach the string, you have to brace the bow under your knee while seated or kneeling, or you could brace your foot against a rock. And here are some images of how to string the Scythian bow, using that special technique rather than brute strength. Some artistic images of Amazon archers have been misunderstood until now. Here's an example. This black figure vase shows an Amazon archer. She's bending far backwards. She seems to be aiming randomly at the sky with a Scythian and a Greek rider on either side of her. Some art specialists interpreted this scene as, quote, a dying Amazon collapsing in battle. But in fact, The Amazon's stance is an accurate portrayal of an archer shooting an arrow a very long distance. That's the stance he would take. And the Greek and Scythian riders on either side, that may indicate that they're observers of a long-distance archery contest, like those described by ancient historians, and we even have the scores recorded in an ancient inscription on the Black Sea of Scythian long-distance archery records. Scythians were famous for their accuracy and their long-distance shooting. Images of Amazons holding more than one arrow while drawing their bows puzzled some art scholars. Some thought it was a mistake by the Greek artist, but in fact this is an archery technique for speed shooting arrows. It shows, it allows an archer to shoot arrows in quick succession without having to reach for arrows from the quiver. And archery experts tell me that the bow of that Amazon on the vase appears to be shown in a braced position with a little grip setback, whereas the string is stretched in the drawn position. That's a slight inaccuracy, but it perhaps indicates that the artist knew about the Scythian speed archery techniques, but wasn't drawing from life, just imagining how they might have held the arrows. Scythian archers were famous also for their speed shooting. They were, some estimate that they could let fly an arrow every 1 to 3 seconds. Besides bows and arrows, Amazons were often shown with swords, battle axes, and a pair of spears, the very same weapons that are found in Scythian burials. And here are some Amazons using a variety of Scythian weapons. We have a unique and beautiful vase painting showing an Amazon taking aim with a sling. And you can see that her 2 spears are stuck in the ground on the left and her bow is on the right. I talked with an expert on ancient slinging techniques, and his name is John Ma. He says that her stance is quite accurate, and piles of sling pebbles have been found among the weapons buried with Scythian women. Now, as you all know, Wonder Woman is famous for her golden lasso. So you can just imagine how excited I was to find this rare vase painting in an obscure museum in Oxford, Mississippi. An Amazon twirling a lasso while she's on horseback. She's charging toward a Greek warrior who's hiding underneath his shield, decorated with a snake in the upper right there. And this action scene decorated a Greek woman's jewelry or cosmetic box. That's interesting. Several ancient Greek writers described steppe warriors, women's skills with the lasso, and explained how they used them to rope enemies in battle. And there's a reconstruction of that. And as I mentioned, I'm sure you've noticed, the clothing worn by Amazons changed from Greek hoplite costumes and helmets to kind of practical action wear that was actually worn by nomads whose lives centered on horses. The wild patterns and textures of the leggings and sleeves match some of the textiles and garments that are recovered from Scythian graves. Typical Amazons in vase paintings are shown in these patterned tunics and trousers. They have geometric designs, and some even have griffins, lions, and deer. And they're also wearing leather boots and soft pointed caps with ear flaps and leopard skins and other furs. And these are all items that are found in among the grave goods in Kurgans. And here's some warrior women's clothing reconstructed from some of the grave goods. The Greeks were fascinated and appalled by Amazon's trousers. That's something that no Greek man or woman would be caught dead in. Greeks wore simple rectangles of cloth held in place with pins. Trousers are stitched together from fitted pieces. Who invented trousers? The Greeks actually claimed that the first pair of trousers were created by 3 different warrior queens from eastern lands. They're actually onto something here. Trousers were indeed invented on the steppes by the people who first began riding horses. We have some examples of clothing from graves across the steppes. The earliest pairs of trousers have been found preserved in graves from nearly 3,000 years ago. Of course, trousers weren't just practical, they're necessary for a life on horseback. And those were first, those are, if you think about it, trousers and leggings are the first ever tailored garments. They require being sewn, pieced together and sewn together. They're also equalizers for the Scythian women. Archaeologists find both men and women buried with trousers. Now, some women were buried in long, wide skirts, but a long, wide skirt can also quickly be made into riding pants if it's voluminous enough. Here's how to turn your dress into fighting gear in case anyone wonders. And that technique was actually used by warrior women of India with their saris. It was called soldier-style sari. The Greeks were fascinated by another barbarian custom, tattoos. Now, the Greeks thought tattoos were barbaric, worse than trousers. They thought of, tattoos were used for criminals and slaves. But according to the Greek writers of antiquity, women of Scythia voluntarily wore tattoos, considered them marks of beauty. And here's some vase paintings showing foreign women with weapons on Greek vases. These are identified as Thracian women. The ancient Greek vase painters lovingly detailed deer, snakes, and geometric tattoo designs on the arms and legs of barbarian women. And once again, you can see that sort of push-pull of attraction and anxiety for the Greeks. They think they're beautiful, but also kind of horrifying. And the similarity between the Amazon sleeves and leggings and the tattoo designs on their arms and legs, that's really striking. And sometimes I think it's difficult to tell the difference, whether those are tattoos or designs on clothing. And we now have solid physical evidence to prove that women of those regions did have tattoos, much like those shown in the vase paintings. I'm sure some of you have seen the extraordinary photographs of the ice princess of the Altai, and exquisite tattoos of deer with towering antlers and griffins and other creatures. She's just one of a score of ancient Scythian mummies preserved in permafrost whose bodies are heavily tattooed with fantastic and real animals. And some of those tattoos were invisible to the naked eye. Just a few years ago at the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, some of the curators decided to use infrared cameras on what looked like bodies with no tattoos from the permafrost, and it turned out that they were also heavily tattooed. And you can see one of the examples of the tattoos they found with infrared cameras in the top center of this slide. Well, I think I have time for just one more example of an overlooked detail on an ancient artifact that shows how the Greeks were incorporating realistic cultural facts into their depictions of Amazons. And that would be this golden ring. This ring was made in about 425 BC. It's in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. The museum text says the ring shows an Amazon on a horse with her dog hunting a deer. But there is more to the scene, as you can see. And the full significance of this ring, I don't think has been clear, but let's look a little closer. The Amazon's wearing a belted tunic. Her hair and her cloak are blowing back to show the speed. She has the reins choked up to control the horse, and she's about to spear the deer with her javelin. And that deer is so exquisitely detailed on this tiny ring that we can tell the species. It's a spotted fallow deer. It's a buck with broad palmate antlers. And her hunting dog is a type of sighthound that is still used in Central Asia today. And it is attacking the deer from the rear, and you can see that the deer's hind leg is broken. And what about that large bird? Why was it included in the scene? The museum text says it's just a random decoration. But I was looking at photographs of traditional hunters on horseback in Kazakhstan and Mongolia when I realized the significance of the bird on that ring. This is Makpal Abdrazakova of Kazakhstan, female eagle huntress. Falconry has ancient roots on the vast steppes. I learned that one of the female mummies in the Tarim Basin, those famous Urumqi mummies who lived about the time this ring was made, one of them was a female buried with a huge leather mitten on one arm, just like those used for hunting with trained raptors today. The favorite raptor of the steppe nomads is the magnificent golden eagle. These pictures show, on the right, we see an eagle huntress from the 1930s. I can't think of her name right now, but she lived in Europe for a while and then went back to Kazakhstan and took up eagle hunting again. These young women are traditional eagle hunters, apprentices, who are reviving the ancient Scythian and Amazon falconry skills. And this monument in Tuva celebrates hunting with eagles and sighthounds on the steppes. But now let's go back to the golden ring from the 5th century BC. I think it's now obvious that the big bird that's hovering above the deer's head is not just a random decoration at all. It's an eagle with a hooked beak and spread wings and tail. It's about to attack the deer. So I think this stunning ring illustrates an Amazon eagle hunter on horseback accompanied by her hound. All four, the Amazon, the dog, the horse, the eagle, they're all focused on that prize. By training these three animals, the nomads made the harsh, unforgiving steppes into a land rich with accessible game, and the scene on the ring is compelling evidence that the Greek artist had heard about horsewomen of eastern lands who trained eagles to hunt. Amazons of myth may have served many symbolic functions for the ancient Greeks, but archaeology is now showing that warrior women were not merely figments of the Greek imagination, and I think the many examples of naturalistic details and ethnographic features in the ancient artworks, they do provide powerful evidence that the Greek images and ideas of Amazons were in fact influenced by real-life nomadic horsewomen. The Greeks interwove fact and imagination, of course, to create a panoramic world of independent, strong women that they called Amazons. It seems fair to conclude that Amazons as a dream and as a reality have sort of always existed. They're sometimes hidden, but sometimes they come blazing out of the shadows, and powerful Amazons inspired awe in antiquity, and we're now witnessing Amazons winning historical credibility at last. Thank you.